welcome to today's economics lesson. My name is Mr. Berry. This lesson is brought to you by the Northern Cape Department of Education in collaboration with Pagama Research and Development. Today, our knowledge area will be economic issue. We are doing inflation. Our subtopic is the consequences of inflation. Our lesson objectives for today. By the end of the lesson, learners will be able to discuss in detail the consequence of inflation. So this is from your examination guideline that we are currently using. So it says discuss in detail. It is your essay question, so it can come as an essay question. If it's not asked as an essay question, it can be asked under section B and section A. Your pre-knowledge from the previous lesson, we have examined ways to measure inflation. As a reminder, we looked at indexes, CPI, PPI, weighting, and the inflation rate. We looked at explaining different types of inflation, where we explained consumer inflation. We had your core inflation, your CPI, CPI axis, and then you also looked at the stagflation, hyperinflation, just to mention a few. Those were type of inflation. We did compare monetarists and Keynesian explanation of inflation. Monetarists still believe in the monetarist theory, still believing that government spending or money supply that is introduced may be the reason of inflation. Keynesians still saying that a government can intervene to cap inflation by using the fiscal policy, by increasing taxation, decreasing government expenditure. The Reserve Bank also using the monetary policy, controlling interest rate and money supply, right? And we did the costs of demand pull inflation and the costs of cost push inflation. Our previous lesson, we looked at the costs of demand pull inflation, where we said aggregate demand increases more than the aggregate supply. We said because of reasons like decline in saving, reduction in taxation, and access to credit caused the demand pull inflation, demand from consumers, investors, government, and exporters. We also looked at cost push inflation, where producers want to increase prices because the cost of production is high. We looked at your wages, we looked at the productivity and other things that were reason that there was a cost push inflation. So this is the pre-knowledge, things that we've done from previous lessons on inflation. Right, so grade 12, I'll give you 5 minutes to do the baseline activity. This is terminology, so you read a sentence and you give a term for the description that you have here. This become part of your section A for every paper 1.3. You always find description. So I'll give you 5 minutes to write terms for these descriptions. Right, grade 12, let's look at your answers. 1.1, condition of low growth, high unemployment, and high rate of inflation. That is of stagflation. It occurs when there is low growth, unemployment is high, and inflation is so high. 1.2, demand of goods and services are higher than the supply. That is your demand pull inflation. So when demand of goods and services are higher than the supply, it will create the demand pull. A sustainable and significant increase in a general level over time, in a general price level over time, that is inflation. An increase in the price is caused by an increase in the cost of production, that is your cost push inflation. Situation where prices rise rapidly, that people lose confidence, that is hyperinflation. When you look at this rapidly, we remember that is the inflation that is called a runaway inflation. It increases above 50%. That is a runaway inflation, your hyperinflation. Right, let's look at today's terminology. Remember, it is important to know your terms as part of your terminology. That 1.3, the same activity that we did, you need to know the terms, and also on your data respond, your 0.3 question of all your data respond is always asking you to describe a certain economic term. The first one is uncertainty. Economic uncertainty arises when inflation rates are unpredictable, making it difficult for businesses and consumers to plan for the future. So in this case, you say that businesses and consumers do not have confidence because of uncertainties. They do not know if they can invest as businesses, or consumers can rely in that economy. Social unrest. In extreme cases, hyperinflation, which is your runaway inflation, can lead to social unrest and political instability due to the erosion of purchasing power and economic hardship. Remember, when there is inflation, the purchasing power decreases. The relationship between inflation and the purchasing power is that when prices increase, the purchasing power decreases. So this may result in social unrest, where people are fighting because there is high prices, there's hyperinflation. Imagine if prices are increasing by 50% daily. You can't even focus even when you are at work, because you just want to knock off to go buy before the prices are increasing. So it creates so much uncertainty. Then inflation expectations. The anticipated rate of inflation in the future, as perceived by consumer, businesses, and investors, influencing the economic decision. So inflation expectation is the inflation that we are expecting as consumers, business, and investors. This will affect our decision making as the users, or as the users of this inflation indicator. So we need to know the expectations so that we avoid the uncertainties when we make decisions. Right. The consequence of inflation. Understanding this consequence of inflation helps policymakers and individuals make informed decisions about economic policy, investment strategies, and personal financial planning in the inflationary environment. So understanding the result or the effect of inflation will help policymakers, individuals, investors, the government, all the users to plan well for this inflationary environment. The effects of inflation is uneven. So inflation does not affect us the same way. As much is not good for anyone. We say inflation is like a virus into the economy because it decreases the purchasing power. It creates uncertainties. However, it does not affect all of us the same way. There are people who are affected more than others. So that's why we're looking at the consequence of inflation. And we look at different people, how are they affected by this inflation. While it does not clearly benefit anyone, certainly harms most. It also harms some less than others. So inflation, it harms most people, but then some are more disadvantaged than others. Inflation also tends to redistribute income from the lower earner groups to the higher income groups. Why? This is because people in the low income groups do not have assets that can rise in value faster than the rate of inflation to help them overcome the effects of inflation. So the reason they say it takes from those who do not have, the low incomer to the high incomers, is because the low income earners, they do not have assets that are appreciating above the inflation rate. So whatever that they may be having, they cannot sustain themselves when the inflation is high. Unlike those who have already, their assets may be rising in value more than the inflation rate. Powerful groups such as trade unions, large companies, and the wealthy people are able to increase their share of national income at the expense of the disadvantaged people, such as pensioners, the unemployed, and the welfare recipients. So, powerful groups. These powerful groups may be your special interest group when we look at public sector. You had the special interest group like trade unions, they may be bargaining for more wages. So when they bargain for more wage is one of the cost push inflation. When wage increase, the price of goods and services will increase. So they bargain for more wage. After bargaining for more wage, there's more income from those groups who are receiving this wage. Price increase. It disadvantages these ones who are not employed because they are not receiving that wage that was bargained for. Those who are receiving pension, their money is still the same. However, they are affected now negatively. Large companies also and wealthy people, they may want to increase their profit measures. And then by rising prices, this will affect what? The marginalized groups, the pensioners, the unemployed people, and those who receive grants from the government because their income is not increasing every time when there is inflation. But then those who are working, who have trade unions, they are able to go and bargain and strike for more money. Then that will also lead to more inflation. So inflation can create inflation. So when we looked at a previous lesson where we looked at causes of inflation, we can also say inflation can be the cause of inflation. Because of inflation, people are bargaining for more wage. They give them more wage. The same wage, it creates further inflation. So the cause of inflation can be inflation as well. Right, let's look at how it affects various groups of people. We have debtors and creditors. Debtors are those ones who borrow the money. They are going to benefit. They get money from somebody. Creditors are the ones that are lending. So creditors will be lending people money. So we have debtors and creditors. They are not affected the same way. So inflation is not affecting them in the same way. So debtor is a person that will borrow money and they pay it over time. And then creditor is giving you the money now. Right. Borrowers benefit from price increase. Lenders suffer due to price increase. Borrowers, debtors, benefit. Lenders, which is your creditors, suffer. So when a person borrow you money, they borrow you money today. Today it has a purchasing power that is better than next year. So when a person gives you money today and then you are going to pay them December, chances are some price they are affected by inflation then, and you are paying them the money that is given to you. Let's remove interest rate on this, because sometimes interest rate can even be lesser than the inflation that is increasing. Inflation has increased by 7%, then you charge this person 3%, for example. So it means that the money that the lender is getting, it has now less purchasing power as compared to when you received the money. This is because borrowers receive money with a relatively higher purchasing power. So a borrower will get the money when it has a purchasing power that is high. And then they repay their loans with a lower purchasing power. Who's suffering is the person that borrowed, the lender, the person that lended you money is going to suffer because now they receive money with a less purchasing power. This can also work on your stokvels, where we play stokvel, the other person receives money January, we all give this person 100 Rand each. It's 12 of us. This person is getting 1.1. By the time you receive 1.1 in December, it does not have the same purchasing power. That is just an example. However, here we're looking at the borrowing part, right? Because saving, stokvel can be part of saving, not the borrowing part. Just that to explain the purchasing power of money, to say the more price increases, the purchasing power decreases. So on this one, we are taking that debtors are benefiting because they receive money with a higher purchasing power. Creditors are suffering because they receive their money back with a lower purchasing power. Then we have taxpayers. South Africa has a progressive personal income tax system. This is a tax system that we're using, that those who are getting paid more, they pay more tax. This means that the marginal and average tax rate increase in the harmony with the income level. So we are talking bracket creeping. So your tax that you are paying, the marginal additional tax that you are paying, it increases in a harmony with the income level. When your income level increases, then your taxation increases, because we are using a system where those who earn more, they pay more taxes. So as a taxpayer, you suffer. When there's inflation, you bargain for more wage, then your salary income increases, so your bracket increases. Even your taxation increase. So the bracket of the taxation increase, because what? It moves in a harmony with your income level. The more you get paid is the more you pay tax. So as a taxpayer, when there's inflation, your income increases, your taxation increases as well. The higher level individuals income, and the greater the percentage of income he or she has to pay. So when the individual income increases, then they will have to pay more taxes. Taxes are levied on a nominal income, not on the real income. So when they charge us tax, remember your income when you're talking about wage. When your wage increases, sometimes the real wage increases. Your wage increase against the inflation. So you see that when you start working, that your income is increasing by 1,000. However, when you go to the shop, all the money is gone again. You don't see the difference of that 1,000 that has increased on your wage. It's because it is a real wage that has increased. It means your wage increased according to the inflation. So the CPI was 5%, and then your employer added your money with 5%. It means that you will still buy the same basket of goods and services with the money that you are earning. However, tax is not levied on the real income. So they don't look at, the reason your income increased by 1,000 is because the price of goods increased. They just look at the nominal income to say your income increased by 1,000. We are going to charge you from the new income. That disadvantage a taxpayer. They don't look at the reason the income increased. The reason is because there's high price. So the real income increased by 5%. Inflation is also increasing by 5%. They go to your nominal income and they charge you tax on your nominal income, which is disadvantaging the workers. Therefore, if the income tax schedule remains unchanged, inflation increased the average rate of personal income tax. So if they say the bracket for a person earning this much is the same, so you are going to be charged on your nominal income, meaning it does what? It is affecting you as a taxpayer. Individual will have to pay higher taxes even if they are actually no better off than before. You are not better than before. You are not better off than before, because your wage increased in terms of the real income, not the nominal one. So, but now you are paying more taxation. This is known as a bracket creeping. Bracket creeping, it means the more you get paid, your tax bracket also increases. So taxpayers are affected negatively. Let's talk about taxation like indirect tax as well. VAT. Since you are not working, you are in school, however, you are also a taxpayer. You pay VAT whenever you buy your goods. So when the VAT increases, it disadvantages you as a taxpayer as well. Because now, if it moves from 15% to 17%, it means the product will be charged now 17%, which is higher than the 15%. Now it is going to be more expensive. So it's not only affecting those who are working, it also affects the indirect taxation. Example, VAT. If VAT increases, then it means you are going to pay more for the goods that you are paying, that you are buying. So it does have a negative impact on taxpayers overall. Right, salary and wage earners. So those who are working, salary and wage earners, how are they affected? Price increases affect people whose income are relatively fixed. So those one that their income are fixed for some time. In other words, people whose incomes remain constant do not increase at the same rate as prices do. So those people are affected. When prices are increasing, but then their income remains the same. When price increases, it means the purchasing power of your money decreases. So meaning you won't be able to buy the same items that you used to buy before with the same money. This group includes retired people, pensioners, and the poor. So the retired people, pensioners, their money, if it's 450 per child, is 450 for the entire year, even if the inflation is increasing. So their income is fixed, is relatively fixed. So they are going to suffer when the prices are increasing. As price increases, their almost fixed incomes purchase less and less. When price increases, their almost fixed income will be purchasing less and less. They won't be able to buy or to afford things that they used to afford before because prices are increasing. However, there are individuals and entrepreneurs whose income often increase at a rate that is higher than the inflation rate, and they do not suffer but gain from inflation. Like I said, inflation does not affect people the same way. People with fixed income, it affects them negatively because their money remain the same, the prices are increasing, so they purchase less. People with flexible income, when the inflation increase, they may increase their income. For example, landlords, when inflation increase, they may increase the rental money. Then they can fight against these high prices by increasing their rent money. So people who are working hours where they can put overtime, then they do what? They put those overtime so that they are able to afford what they need to afford. So the flexible income earners, they are more better off than the fixed income earners. Investors and savers. So you have investors, you have savers. Remember, saving and investment is not the same thing. So savers are affected differently than investors. Right. So by looking at this already, you know a saver will be disadvantaged than an investor because investors, you may be investing in things that brings more return. Inflation reduces the purchasing power of money over time. For investors holding cash or low interest savings account, the real value of their savings diminishes because their interest earned may not keep up the pace with inflation. So savers, they are affected negatively because sometimes they are saving, even if you are saving at the bank, the interest that you are getting may be lower than what? The inflation. So the real value of your saving decreases over time because the interest that you are receiving is lower than what? The inflation rate. So when you are saving, you may be disadvantaged. When you go to withdraw your money, you find that now it has a less purchasing power because now prices are high. So savers are disadvantaged. Even if the nominal interest rates are positive, if they are lower than inflation rate, savers experience a negative real return. Even if interest rate is increasing for savers, if inflation is higher than that interest rate, still a saver will have less money. So imagine a saver that is saving money at home. That one is worse because there's no interest at all. It means that by the time, now I think the example of Stockpile can come in here because there's no interest when you are playing Stockpile. The money that you are going to receive in the later stage will have what? Less purchasing power against the person that received the money first. This means their savings can buy fewer goods and services in the future as compared to today. So savers, when they save their money, it will buy fewer goods in the future as compared to today. However, we do encourage savings. Why do we encourage savings? It, as a leakage as it is, it leads to investment, which is now an injection into the economy. And a country that has a tendency of spending than saving will have low investment in the future, and it will also attract inflation in the short run because there's too much spending. Assets with fixed nominal values. These assets have a fixed nominal value and give a return if they are held until maturity. So you have assets that have a fixed nominal value. so they may not mature as much. When they are paid because their values remain constant, their purchasing power of the nominal values decrease as price increase. So if you are investing in assets that have a fixed nominal value, it may be a problem because in the future, it may have less purchasing power. Let's look at assets with flexible market values. So the investors that are investing in flexible market values, the holders of shares and fixed property usually gain by price increases because their nominal value of these assets tend to increase at least proportionally to the rate of inflation. That is their market value. If their market value is flexible. So if your market value is flexible, you may be investing in fixed property. Inflation is increasing. However, the value of your assets may be increasing further than the inflation, meaning you will gain from inflation. Right. Let's say you invest in a property like a house, now and then in the next 10 years you sell it, it has appreciated, it has gained value. The value, maybe you are now, prices of houses are too expensive now because of inflation. The same house that you bought 500,000, for example, now it's $1 million in the market. It means that you are gaining because the investment, it was flexible. Right. Often the price of these assets increased more rapidly than the increase in the general price. So if you are investing in a flexible market, the value of your investment will increase further than the general price, further than inflation. So investors are benefiting than savers. Savers may receive their money with a less purchasing power than investors. So investors may negotiate, they even negotiate for better returns when there's inflation. Right, we have industrial peace. The heading is industrial peace. However, inflation does not bring industrial peace. It brings industrial instabilities. People are not happy with inflation. When there's inflation, there's industrial instabilities. People want more money because they cannot afford to go to work. Their income that they're getting is less. The cost of living is too high. So inflation may bring industrial instabilities. Wage bargain is often accompanied by strike and mass action. So when they are bargaining for their wage, what is wage bargaining? They say we want 10% increase. They say we're giving you 4%. We want 10% increase. They are not giving them. They are going on the street. They start striking, right? So it brings what? Industrial instability. There's no stability. There's no peace in the industry because people are bargaining for more wage. And then the production stops when people are outside bargaining for more wages. This action can sometimes spill over into violence and which affect the society at large. In an extreme situation, in the presence of exponential high inflation, together with government that is determined not to yield to wage increase demands, which can push inflation to higher levels, widespread civil unrest follow. This can even get to civil unrest. If inflation is increasing, government is saying, no, we're not going to take part in these in demands of increase in the price, in the wages, then it can even lead to more damages, even when it comes to our infrastructures and all of those things where people are now fighting for these wages. You find that in our communities where even the municipality people, those who are removing garbage, they start striking and so much things are happening. That is what industrial instability. So inflation can create a situation where there is industrial instability. Unemployment and poverty. So inflation will lead to unemployment and poverty. So it can increase unemployment and poverty. When prices rise faster than income, consumer purchasing power decreases. This can lead to reduced consumption of goods and services, which in turn may cause businesses to produce less and potentially lay off some workers to cut costs. People are not buying, prices are high. So what they do, they start producing less because no one is buying because prices are high. And then when they produce less, they lay off some workers. Unemployment increases. Inflation driven by the increased cost of raw material, labor, energy can lead to high production costs for businesses. To maintain profit margins, businesses may reduce their workforce through layoff or hiring freezing. So they don't hire anymore because of what? The cost of raw material, labor, energy is already expensive. So for them to cut the cost, they may lay off people or stop hiring. That will do what? Increase unemployment. And when there's unemployment, that will lead to poverty. Poverty, especially among vulnerable population with limited resources to cope with rising costs. So this will increase poverty, especially among vulnerable population with limited resources to cope with this price increases. Right, and we have balance of payment. So inflation will lead to unemployment and poverty, and then we have balance of payment problems. So with inflation increasing, prices increasing, it means prices are not only increasing for us, even for exporters, people who used to come and buy from us. They may be discouraged to buy because the prices are high. So when you compare your import and your export, you find that export is now decreasing. Why? Because the prices are high. High inflation can lead to an increase in the domestic production cost, making export more expensive compared to goods produced in countries with lower inflation rate. So inflation will lead to our export prices being high. When export prices is high, when prices are high, the demand decreases. This reduces the competitiveness of domestic goods in the international market. So we become less competitive when it comes to what? International markets, leading to a decrease in export volumes and potentially widening the trade deficit. So export will be less, import may be high. We'll also start buying from abroad because we see prices from local, they are too high, there's too much inflation, and we have the international market and we can buy somewhere else cheaper. So import is going to increase, export will decrease. That will create a balance of payment problems, which is a deficit due to high import and low export. The low export is caused by high prices, high local prices. People are no longer buying. Foreign investors may view high inflation as a sign of economic instability and uncertainties. And the foreign investors don't like uncertainties. They want to know their returns. They want to know where are they investing and what will be their returns. This can reduce foreign direct investment and portfolio investment as investors seek a stable environment with low inflation rate to protect their value of their investment. Reduced foreign investment inflows can further strain our balance of payment. So also when there's uncertainties, there's no price stability, it may create disinvestment or reduce foreign direct investment. They may stop investing in us, then that will affect our BOP negatively. Psychological influence, how are we affected by inflation? Inflation affects us all the time. We panic when prices are about to increase. When there's a sale, that's why when there's this Black Friday where people are fighting because they have a knowledge that prices are low, and then they are scared that tomorrow the price will change and they will be high. Then that is a psychological influence to consumers. Consumer may experience a decrease in purchasing power, leading to feelings of financial insecurities, anxiety about their future expenses. When you don't have money, you're just stressing about your financial insecurities. Will you be able to afford in the future? This can lead to panic buying if consumers are expecting an increase in inflation. We may buy more because we are expecting prices to increase. People in the lower income brackets feel severe effects of increase in the price of the essential items such as bread, maize meal, rental, and transport costs. They may panic also because prices are increasing. Businesses may hesitate to invest and expand due to uncertainties about the cost and the demand stability. So also businesses may be influenced that they are scared because the uncertainties, the cost of production will increase and the demand may not be there because people do not have money to buy. Right. So these are other things that may cause inflation. So the first thing is inflation feed on itself, causing further inflation. So inflation can cause inflation. This is called inflation spiral. High wage demands cause producers to increase their prices to maintain their profit. So inflation creates more inflation. This happens again and again and again, pushing prices further every time. So inflation can be a cause of inflation. If the government does not keep this wage price spiral in check, inflation may get out of control. So the next time, grade 12, we'll be looking at measures to combat this inflation. So if government does not take charge, then it may be a problem, right? Inflation leads to increased uncertainties. The uncertainties will discourage saving and investment. And then investment, it is very necessary for our economic growth. So this will reduce economic growth because inflation reduces the real value of the money. And the rent can buy fewer items as compared to before. Right, grade 12 will do this activity. We learned on how to calculate inflation. So I want you to look at this. I'll give you only 2 minutes to calculate the inflation rate here at point A. Right, we are done calculating. Now let's look at the answers. So you take the previous year, the current year, 11.0 minus the previous year over the previous year. So it's current year minus previous over the previous times 100, and your answer was 5.3. So you must show all your calculation to answer this question. The next question, why is inflation regarded as a never-ending process? I'll give you further 2 minutes to answer this one. Right, grade 12, let's look at the possible answers. So inflation is regarded as a never-ending process because we say it feeds on the inflation. Inflation can cause inflation. When consumers or workers feel that their earnings are not enough to sustain their livelihood, they demand high wages. If their demand are successful, wages increase. Businesses will increase their prices to compensate for the higher input costs. This will result in high prices. So the more they're bargaining for more wage, is the more the prices will increase. Once prices increases, workers will be in the same financial predicament and will demand higher wages once again. So they will keep on demanding, and then prices will also keep on increasing. Right, for your homework, grade 12, you are going to answer these 2 8-mark questions. The first one, what is the impact of inflation on individual taxpayers? How are they affected? We have discussed this, and they are affected negatively. You're going to discuss 4 points. Writing in full. Remember, your 8-mark, to maximize your marks, you must write in full. The next one, what is the impact of inflation on investors and savers? Right, investors are not affected the same way as savers. Again, is the 8-mark. You need 4 full sentences for you to maximize the 8 marks, no listing. Right, to summarize today's lesson, we looked at the effects of inflation, including reduced purchasing power for consumers. That is the first one. When inflation is high, the purchasing power decreases, which can lead to a decline in the standard of living. So when the purchasing power decreases, that will lead to decline in standard of living. Additionally, inflation can distort economic decision, causing uncertainties among businesses and potentially hindering the long-term investment and growth. So grade 12, you look at all these headings. This is an essay question. Your debtors and creditors, savers and investors, it is important for you to know the heading because if it comes as an essay question for your prelim November, you will be getting, more especially for November final exam, because usually in the November final paper, they don't give you headings. You'll be getting the marks for the headings. I always say you must try to create a mnemonic for yourself for this heading. Come up with a sentence that makes sense to you, to remember that the D is for debtors and so on, and your S for savings and so on, so that you remember the headings when you write your exams. Right, the preview of the next lesson. The next lesson will be looking at inflation problems in South Africa, measures to combat. Now we're looking at the ways to combat demand pull and cost push inflation, since we know these are the costs. So we need to look at measures. The measures to combat inflation is an essay question. It's a long question as well. So we identified 2 essays in the unit. Is the one that we just did now, where you're looking at the consequences of inflation, and then now discussing in detail measures to combat inflation. It's another long question that we have in this unit. And we'll also evaluate the success of inflation targeting, which is your 3 to 6%. We need to evaluate if it's successful or not. Grade 12, thank you so much for joining in today. I'll see you next time.